sold to a brothel at 10 and bought out at 20. A cowboy walked her home and gave her soft shoes. The deed was already signed before I got there. That's the part nobody tells you about a thing like that. You picture a scene, some moment where a man steps in, says the right words, and the whole terrible machinery stops. That ain't how it works. The machinery had been running 10 years by the time I rode into Caldera Flats, and all I did was pay what it cost to make it stop. $42, that's what I paid for Nora Voss's freedom. I want to say that number easy because it ought to sit easy. $42 is nothing, less than a good horse, less than a saddle, but the truth is it sat on me strange for a long time. Not because of the money, because of what the number meant. That a man could price a girl at 10 and sell her, and the price 10 years later was $42, and nobody in that town had thought to pay it until some cattleman came through on business he didn't expect to have any part of. Let me tell you how I came to be in Caldera Flats. My name is Calhoun Briggs. I ran cattle between the Mora Valley and the high plains east of the Sangers, had about 300 head that year, a small operation, nothing to brag on. October of 1873, I was moving a small gather of 22 steers to a buyer in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and I came through Caldera Flats because the creek route was faster and my lead steer, a heavy-shouldered longhorn I called Senator, had been favoring his left front for 2 days, and I didn't want him on hard caliche any longer than necessary. Caldera Flats was a watering stop. I meant to spend one night. The town was the kind that had grown up fast around a silver strike and was already shrinking back. The hotel had half its windows boarded. The livery was sound, but the man who ran it had the look of someone counting down. Main Street was 3 blocks of false fronts, most of them selling things that kept men from thinking too hard: liquor, cards, women. The place that sold women was called the Cameo, and it sat on the north end of Main, and it looked better kept than anything else in town, which told you something about the economics of the place. I wasn't thinking about the Cameo. I had my steers in the livery pen and Senator's hoof poulticed, and I was eating a plate of beans in the one restaurant that was still open, and I was minding my own business the way a man does when he's tired and has miles yet ahead of him. The trouble started because of a window. The restaurant had a window that faced the alley beside the Cameo, and partway through my beans I heard something in that alley that made me look up. Not loud. That was the thing. It was the quiet of it that made me look, a sound like someone trying very hard not to make a sound. What I saw through that window was a girl in a thin dress standing against the wall in the October cold, and a man in a good coat standing in front of her with one hand braced above her head and the other in motion. And she was pressed into the wall with her face turned sideways and her eyes shut. And she wasn't fighting him because she had learned by then what happened when you fought. I set down my fork. I want to be careful here because I don't want to make it something it wasn't. I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel like a hero riding in. I felt the plain ordinary disgust a man feels when he sees something that is wrong, and I felt the equally plain and ordinary obligation that comes with being the only person who is seeing it and who is able to do something about it. That's all it was. You see a wrong thing and you are able to address it, you address it. Any man worth his salt does the same. I went out the front of the restaurant, down the boardwalk, and around into the alley. The man in the good coat heard me coming. He turned. He was somewhere between 40 and 50, broad across the chest, with the kind of face that thinks it deserves things. He looked at me the way men like him always look at an interruption, not afraid, just contemptuous, like I was a fly that had landed on his collar. He said, "This is a private arrangement." I said, "Step away from her." He said, "You don't know who I am." I said, "Don't need to." He said a few things after that. I've forgotten most of them. What I remember is that after I said what I said a second time, slowly, with my hands at my sides, he looked at my hands and then at my face, and something in the arithmetic of the situation changed for him, and he left. Men like him read situations. The situation had changed. The girl hadn't moved from the wall. She was still pressed against it, face turned, eyes shut. And I understood then that she was waiting for whatever came next. For me or for him, it didn't matter, because for 10 years whatever came next had always been the same kind of thing, and the only thing you could do was wait for it to be over. I took off my coat. "Here," I said, "you're cold." She opened her eyes. Dark eyes, deep set, the kind that have seen too much and learned to give nothing away. She looked at my coat like it might be a trick. I'm Calhoun Briggs, I said. I'm a cattleman passing through. I've got no business with the cameo. I just saw what I saw and I don't like leaving wrong things alone. She took the coat. Not eager, careful, the way you take a thing when you're not sure yet if taking it costs you something. Her name was Nora. She told me that much, standing there in the alley with my coat around her thin dress and her breath making small ghosts in the cold air. She didn't tell me the rest of it that night. The rest of it I learned later, and in pieces, the way you learn anything about a person who has learned to give nothing away. The rest of it was this. Her father had brought her to Caldera Flats when she was 9, following the silver rumors. He was a Prussian immigrant named Friedrich Voss, and he had a wife who died on the trail and a drinking problem and a debt he couldn't pay. In the spring of 1863, when Nora was 10 years old, he had sold her to the woman who ran the cameo, a woman everyone called Mrs. Delaney, for $8 and a cleared debt. Mrs. Delaney had put her to work in the kitchen at first, and then in the laundry, and then, when she was old enough, in the rooms. That was the machinery. It had been running 10 years. I didn't know any of that when I walked her back to the cameo's rear door that night. I just knew she was cold and young and had been treated like something that could be owned. And I had a feeling about that I can't name precisely, except to say it sat in my chest like a coal. "Thank you for the coat," she said at the door. "Keep it," I said. She looked at me again with those dark, reading eyes. "People don't do things for nothing," she said. "I do," I said. "It ain't nothing, it's a coat." She went inside. I went back to the hotel and lay on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about my steers and senators' hoof and the miles between here and Las Vegas. And I thought about Nora Voss standing against that alley wall waiting for whatever came next. I was up before dawn. I told myself I was checking on Senator. His hoof was better, tender still but better, and I stood in the livery with my hand on his neck in the lamplight and the smell of horse and hay around me, and I knew I was not going to leave Caldera Flats that morning. I am not a man given to sentiment. Ask anyone who has worked cattle with me. I have always been more comfortable with animals than people, and more comfortable with solitude than company, and I have never been the kind of man who talks about his feelings because I was not raised in a place where that was a language anyone spoke. My father was a Tennessee man who communicated through what he did and what he refused to do, and I learned from him that the things that matter most get carried quiet. But I had a sister once. Her name was Ellie. She died of fever when she was 15. And I will not tell you more than that except to say that the world had not treated Ellie the way Ellie deserved, and when you carry something like that long enough it changes how you see certain things. It changes what you're able to walk away from. I went to the cameo at 7 in the morning. Mrs. Delaney received me in her parlor. She was a stout woman with red hair going gray and the eyes of a ledger keeper. She was always computing something. She looked at me with the particular expression she must have had for men who came early, a professional warmth that didn't reach the eyes. I said, "I'm not here for what you think I'm here for. I want to buy out Nora Voss's contract." Something shifted in her face. Not surprise, exactly. She had probably heard stranger things, but a recalibration. She said, "Nora's not for sale." I said, "Everything's for sale. What's the number?" She studied me. I sat with my hat on my knee and waited. "Where would she go?" Mrs. Delaney said. "She's got no family, no skills that'll earn her $1 anywhere respectable. She steps out of here, she's got nothing." I said, "That'll be her problem to solve." $60, she said. I knew she was testing. 20, I said. We went back and forth. It was the same as buying a horse, except worse, because I was buying a person's freedom and haggling about it, and every dollar felt like a small indignity added to a pile that was already 10 years high. But you can't pay the asking price in a negotiation. Paying the asking price tells the other party that the number was too low. $42, that's where we landed. I paid in coin, she counted it twice. "She knows what she's walking into," Mrs. Delaney said. "The world out there isn't kinder." "Probably not," I said. "But it'll be her world." Nora was in the kitchen when Mrs. Delaney sent for her. She came out with flour on her hands from the morning bread, and she looked at me standing in that parlor, and then at Mrs. Delaney, and she read the situation the way she read everything, fast, and without showing that she was reading. Mrs. Delaney said, "You're free to go." Nora said nothing for a moment, then, "Go where?" "Wherever you like," I said. She looked at me, You bought my contract. I did. Why? I thought about it. Because it was the right thing, I said, and because I could. What do you want from me for it? This was the moment I understood what 10 years had done to her. She was asking the honest question, the only question that had ever made sense in her experience. Nothing came free. Nothing came without a cost paid in the usual currency. She was 20 years old, and she had never once in her life received anything that did not require something of her in return. And she was asking me, plainly and without shame because she was past shame, what the cost of this was going to be. I said not a thing. She watched me. That's the truth, I said. I'm a cattleman from the Mora Valley. I've got 22 steers in the livery pen that need to be in Las Vegas by the end of the week. My steer senator has a bad hoof. That's the sum of my situation. I've got no use for anything the cameo sells, and I've got no use for a woman who owes me. I paid $42 because it was $42, and she had a balance sheet, and that's what it took to close it. Now it's closed. Nora Voss looked at me for a long time. She had a way of being still that was different from calm. It was the stillness of someone who has learned that motion costs you. Every move you make is a move that can be read and used. She had learned to be very, very still. All right, she said at last. You got somewhere to be? I asked. No. Clothes, anything here that belongs to you. She thought about it. My mother's ring, Mrs. Delaney has it. I looked at Mrs. Delaney. Mrs. Delaney's mouth tightened. She went to a drawer, came back with a small gold ring, plain band, no stone. She set it on the table without looking at Nora. Nora picked it up and put it in the pocket of her dress. We walked out the front door of the cameo and into the morning. The air was cold and bright, the kind of October morning that feels like the world has been washed. There were 2 men on the boardwalk across the street who watched us come out, and I felt their eyes on Nora, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very attentive, the way it does before trouble, but they just watched and said nothing. Nora stopped on the boardwalk. She stood there with the ring in her pocket and my coat. She'd brought it back, I saw, folded over her arm, and she looked at the street and the sky and the far line of the mesa to the west, and I don't know what she was thinking. Her face didn't tell you things. She handed me my coat. Thank you, she said, for all of it. You're welcome. She started to walk east, toward the end of town. I watched her go. She was wearing thin shoes. I noticed this now in the morning light, shoes that were barely held together, the sole of the left one starting to separate from the upper, and the ground was cold and hard, and she was walking east into nothing, no coat, no money, no direction except away. I called after her. Miss Voss. She stopped and turned. Where are you headed? I said. East, she said. East is a long way. On those shoes you'll be barefoot by noon. She looked down at her feet. Something passed across her face, not embarrassment exactly, more like the tired acknowledgement of one more problem in a long list of problems that had no solution. I said, I'm going to Las Vegas with my steers. It's 4 days. Honest work, you can help with the cook fire and the camp, or just ride along or not come at all, I don't care which. But Las Vegas is a real town. There's a dress shop and a boarding house run by a woman named Clara Oakes who is a fair and decent person. There are jobs that are honest work. Might be a better starting point than walking east in shoes that are falling apart. She looked at me. No obligation, I said. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you what I know about Las Vegas and offering a way to get there that doesn't involve you arriving barefoot. She was quiet for a moment. Then, why do you do that? Do what? Talk like that, tell me all the pieces of it. Most men just say what they want. I'm telling you what's true. You can do what you want with it. She looked east at the empty distance. She looked back at me. All right, she said, for the second time that morning. We went to the general store first. I bought her a pair of shoes. This is what I mean about the details that stay with you. I've forgotten the names of half the men I've ridden with over the years, forgotten the prices of cattle I sold, forgotten the make of the rifle I carried for 6 years. But I remember that those shoes cost $1.15, and they were brown leather, soft calfskin, low ankle, and the woman behind the counter wrapped them in paper and tied the paper with string. And when Nora unwrapped them, she looked at them for a long moment without speaking. They're soft, she said. Good leather usually is, I said. She sat down right there on the bench by the store's door and took off her old shoes and put on the new ones and laced them herself, careful, taking her time, like a person who wanted to do this particular thing without hurrying. When she stood up, she looked down at her feet once, and that was all. No great expression, just looked at them. But I noticed she kept looking at them through the rest of the morning. Small glances down, the way you check on something you don't entirely trust is real yet. We collected my steers from the livery around mid-morning. I had a horse, a steady gray mare called Tuck, and Nora rode double behind me until we reached a settlement 6 miles out where a man sold me a second horse, a stout little paint that wasn't fast but was sure-footed and honest, a good trail horse. I put Nora on the paint. She could ride. Not polished but capable, she sat the horse like someone who had learned early and in poor conditions, which is to say she sat it naturally, without thinking about it. We said almost nothing the first day. I was working the cattle and she was watching, and the country opened up east of the flats into long yellow grass and distant mesas and the October sky, which was the kind of blue you only get in the high country after the summer rains have stopped. Senator was still tender but moving. The rest of the gather was easy. At noon I boiled coffee over a small fire and cooked salt pork and flat bread in the pan and handed her a plate, and she ate like someone who had not eaten enough in a long time, not desperately, but thoroughly without leaving anything. I noticed but didn't remark on it. In the afternoon, she rode up beside me. She said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "About what?" I said. "About any of it. I don't know how to be a person who is just a person." I thought about that for a while. The cattle moved. Senator was walking easier. "You don't have to figure that out today," I said. "What do I figure out today?" "Today you figure out that you're on a horse going somewhere different than where you were," I said. "That's enough for today." She didn't say anything to that, but she didn't pull back either. She rode at my shoulder for the rest of the afternoon, and the country moved past us, and the light went gold and then orange, and then we made camp by a creek, and the stars came out clear and very close, the way they do at altitude. That night by the fire, she asked me about the Mora Valley. I told her about my land, the house I'd built, which was nothing much, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but mine. The pasture along the creek bottom. The view east from the ridge, which was the best thing about the place, the way the plains went out forever from up there. I told her about Senator, how he'd been with me 5 years, how he was bad-tempered with everyone except me and the boy who fed him, how he'd once kicked a man hard enough to break 3 ribs and the man had it coming. She laughed at that. Small, quick, not a practiced laugh, not a social noise, a real one. It surprised her as much as it surprised me. I told her about the work, moving cattle, the seasons of it, the particular cold of pre-dawn roundups. The way a longhorn can vanish into brush so thick you'd swear there's no animal in there, and then step out of it calm as anything when it suits him. She listened, not like she was being polite, like she was storing things up. "It sounds like a real life," she said. "It's what I know," I said. "Do you like it?" Nobody had asked me that in a long time. "Yes," I said. "I do. I like that it's honest. You work hard, the cattle do well, you get paid fairly. You don't work hard, they don't. It's clear." She nodded slowly. "I've never had anything clear," she said. That was all she said. She rolled into her blankets. I'd given her the better of my 2, and the fire burned down, and I sat with my coffee in the dark and thought about that. The second day opened with frost on the grass, a hard cold that meant winter was coming fast. We broke camp early and moved the cattle at a good pace. Nora rode out wide on the right flank without being asked, keeping a stray heifer from cutting east, and when I called over to ask where she'd learned to work cattle, she called back that she hadn't. She just watched what I did. That afternoon, a man came up the trail behind us, moving fast on a black horse. I knew who he was before he was close enough to see clearly. I knew it from the set of him and the quality of the horse and the direction he'd come from, and I moved Tuck to a stop and waited, and when he pulled up I could see it was the man from the alley, the man in the good coat. He said my name. He'd found it out somehow. He said, "The woman is not yours to take." I said, "She was a free woman when she left Caldera Flats." I watched Mrs. Delaney hand her the paper. He said some things about what he'd paid for and his rights and arrangements he had made, and his voice had the certainty of a man who has never not gotten what he wanted. And I sat on Tuck and listened to all of it and felt nothing in particular except a settled clarity about how this was going to end. When he was done, I said, "What you paid for is done. Whatever arrangement you had with Mrs. Delaney is between you and Mrs. Delaney. Nora Voss is a free woman going to Las Vegas, and I'm going to deliver these steers, and you're going to turn that horse around and go back the way you came." He stared at me. He was reading the situation again. People like him are always reading situations, always calculating, always figuring the odds of resistance. He looked at me for a long time, and I looked back, and I want to be precise. I was not afraid of him. I want to say that without bravado, because bravado is a thing men use when they are actually afraid. I was not afraid. I was clear. There is a difference. He looked past me at Nora, who had ridden up behind me and stopped there. He looked back at me. He turned his horse and went back the way he came. I heard Nora let out a breath behind me, a long one, like she'd been holding it for 10 years. We rode the rest of that afternoon without talking much. But she rode closer to me than she had before, not touching, just close, the way you stay near a fire when the night is cold. I understood that. I didn't make anything of it. I just let her be close. That night she talked. Not all of it at once. The pieces came out the way pieces come out when a person has been holding them so long they've calcified. You work one loose, and it takes a long time to get the next one free. She told me about her father, about the crossing from Prussia, about her mother who sang songs in the wagon and was gone before Nora was old enough to remember the songs properly, only that there had been songs, about the morning she was sold. The thing she remembered most about that morning, she said, was that she had been wearing her good dress, the one her mother had made with the smocking at the collar. She never knew why she'd put that dress on. She'd never worn it again. She didn't know where it had gone. I listened. I didn't try to say the right thing because I don't think there is a right thing to say to something like that. I just listened and let the fire burn and refilled her coffee when it went low. "Do you know what the worst of it was?" she said. "Not the obvious things. The worst of it was not having anything that was mine. Not a single thing. Every object in that building belonged to Mrs. Delaney. The clothes, the shoes. I'd wake up in the morning and the room was Mrs. Delaney's and the dress was Mrs. Delaney's and the day was Mrs. Delaney's. 10 years and nothing was mine." She turned her mother's ring on her finger. She'd put it on that first morning. "The ring," I said. "Yes," she said, "the ring." We were quiet for a while. "And the shoes," she said. She looked down at her feet. The new shoes, soft calfskin, brown leather in the firelight. "Those are mine," she said. "You didn't take them from Mrs. Delaney. You bought them for me. That's different." "It is," I said. She looked at me then with something in her face that I can only call direct. Not searching, not wary, direct. Like she had looked at enough disguised things to know when something was plain. "You're a good man," she said. I said, "I try to be a fair one." "I know the difference," she said. "Between fair and good, Mrs. Delaney was fair by her lights. She kept accounts. She didn't take more than the account said she could take." She paused. "You're good." "You don't keep accounts." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. And she seemed fine with nothing, and the fire burned down, and the night was very cold and very still, and the stars overhead were thick as spilled salt. On the third day, the country changed. We came down off the mesa country onto the approaches to Las Vegas, the land flattening and the grass giving way to scrub, and the first hints of wood smoke from ranch houses in the distance. And I felt the way I always feel when I'm close to finishing a drive, not quite happy, more like the satisfaction of a thing almost done. The steers were road-worn but sound, Senator included, and I thought about the buyer and the price and the ride home, and I thought about what I was going to do when we got to Las Vegas. I had been thinking about this since the first day, thinking about it the way you think about a thing you know is coming and haven't decided how to handle. The fact was that I did not want to just deliver Nora Voss to Clara Oakes's boarding house and ride back to the Mora Valley. I knew this clearly and had known it almost since the first morning. I am a slow man to arrive at certainty about most things, but when I arrive, I stay arrived, and I had arrived at this. I did not want to leave her. This was not a simple feeling. I want to say that plainly. It was not rescue, and it was not pity, and it was not anything base. It was something more like recognition. In 3 days on the trail, I had met a woman who had survived 10 years of something that would have broken most people and come out of it with her mind and her will and her honesty intact, who asked the real question and meant it, who read situations without flinching, Who laughed when something was funny and didn't laugh when it wasn't? Who noticed what was true about things, the difference between fair and good, the importance of something being yours, and said it plainly. She was 20 years old. I was 38. I was a man who'd spent 18 years building a small cattle operation alone, who'd been engaged once and it had come to nothing, who'd settled into the kind of solitude that stops feeling like solitude and starts feeling like just the way things are. I was not a man who thought about love particularly the way some men do. I was a man who thought about work. But I thought about her. I thought about her the way you think about something that has arrived and changed the shape of the room without you deciding that it should. So on the afternoon of the third day, riding through the sage-flat country with Las Vegas's low rooflines showing on the horizon, I told her what I was thinking. I didn't make a speech. I am not built for speeches. I told her that I had a place in the Mora Valley, small but solid, and that it was a quiet life, but it was an honest one, and it was mine. I told her she was welcome to come and see it if she wanted. I told her I wasn't saying this because I owed her anything or she owed me anything. I'd made her clear on that score, and I meant for it to stay clear. I was saying it because 3 days on the trail had told me something about who she was, and what it had told me was that I wanted to know more. She didn't answer right away. We rode a mile before she spoke. She said, I don't know how to live in a house with a man as anything but what I was. I said, then we figure out something different. She said, I might not know how. I said, neither might I. I've been alone a long time. She said, I could work. I could earn my place, cook and keep the house and... I know you could, I said. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to come and see the place, the ridge in particular. The view from the ridge I told you about. After that, you can go anywhere you want. She was quiet again. Just the ridge, she said. Start there, I said. The edge of something showed in her face. Not quite a smile, closer to the possibility of one. All right, she said. Third time, it was becoming a thing between us. We delivered the steers in Las Vegas the morning of the 4th day. The buyer was a stockman named Abelardo Cruz who knew cattle and paid fair, and when he counted out the bills, I felt the clean satisfaction of a thing finished correctly. I squared up with the livery. I bought grain and supplies for the return trip. We left Las Vegas that afternoon, heading west and north toward the Mora. I want to tell you about that ride because it was different from the drive out. No cattle to manage, no purpose but the going. Just 2 horses on a trail that I knew well, through country that was starting to go winter bare, the aspens along the creek bottoms already stripped yellow, the peaks above the Mora Valley getting their first snow. She asked me questions about the country as we rode. What mountains were which? Where the water came from? How far to the next ranch and the one after? I answered and pointed out things she wouldn't know to ask about. The way the elk trails crossed the ridge, the particular juniper stand where I'd once found a bear sleeping in October, the place on the creek where the water ran warm from a hot spring even in January. She listened like she was building something. Like every piece of information was a brick she was laying down in a structure she was constructing in her mind, and the structure was a life, and she was laying it brick by brick because it was the only way she knew how to do anything, carefully and without hurry. On the 2nd day of the return trip it snowed. Just an inch light, an early snow that wouldn't last, but the world went white and quiet, and the horse's breath made great clouds in the cold, and the pines along the ridge were frosted dark green against the white. Nora stopped her paint on the trail and looked around at all of it, the snow and the pines and the silence, and I let her look. I've never been in snow that wasn't in a street, she said. I looked at her looking at it. This is what it is outside of streets, I said. She looked at me. Her face had come open in a way I hadn't seen it open before, not guarded, not reading, just present in it. And I thought, there it is. Whatever she was before this is still there, it will always be there. You don't lose 10 years just because the snow comes and the air is clean. But there was also this. There was also her here now in the snow. We made the Mora Valley late afternoon of the 4th day, the light going copper over the ridge to the west, and the creek glinting below in the shadow. My house sat in the bend of a meadow, small and plain and solid, smoke-stained at the chimney, the corrals out back holding 4 horses that started calling when they heard Tuck coming. She got down from the paint and stood in the yard and looked at the house and the meadow and the ridge above. I took the horses and put them in the corral and came back and found her still standing there. It's quiet, she said. Most of the time, I said. I like it. I started a fire in the stove and put on water and found the coffee and the dried beans and the salt pork. And I worked in the kitchen that was also the main room, and she stood in the doorway between the main room and the small, cold back room looking at things. Not touching, just looking. This is yours, she said, all of it. Yes. You built it. Most of it. Neighbor helped me with the roof. She came in and sat at the table. She looked at her hands, the ring, the new shoes on her feet, the ordinary, honest surface of the table. I set coffee in front of her. Thank you, she said. I sat down across from her. Outside the window the evening was coming fast, the sky going to violet above the ridge, the first star appearing. She said, I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me true. All right, I said. Why did you really do it? By the contract, the shoes, bring me here. I thought about Ellie. I thought about that alley wall and the sound that was trying hard not to be a sound. I thought about the 300 head in the pasture east of the house, and the ridge and the view from it that I'd told her about, and what it felt like to have something worth telling about, and what it would feel like to tell it to someone who was really listening. Because it was right, I said. That's still true, but you want more than that. I do. Because I'm a man who's been building a thing alone for a long time, I said. And 3 days on the trail showed me a person who had been through something that would have made most people dishonest or broken or mean, and she came through it honest and careful and still herself. And I thought. I stopped. What did you think? She said. I thought that was somebody worth knowing. She looked at me across the table in the lamplight, and she said nothing for a long time, and I let her say nothing, and the stove ticked, and the fire caught, and the coffee steamed between us. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Not squeezing, not gripping, just her hand on mine, still the way she was still when she was calm, and I understood that this was not the stillness of someone waiting for the bad thing to arrive. This was different. This was a woman being still because she had arrived somewhere and was choosing to stay there. All right, she said. And that was that. I want to tell you what happened after because I know you're wondering about it. She stayed that winter. She stayed through the spring roundup and the summer work and the fall drive, and the following spring she was still there. And by then it was clear that she wasn't staying because she owed me, or because she had nowhere else to go, or because I'd provided and she was paying the debt. She was staying because she'd decided to. I understood the difference by then because she'd made it plain enough in the small daily ways that things get made plain. The way she said what she thought without softening it. The way she disagreed with me when she disagreed and was right about half the time. The way she'd learned the cattle work and done it without being asked, and had opinions about it that were generally worth hearing. She learned the ranch. She learned it the way she'd learned to sit a horse without a lot of ceremony, by watching and doing and adapting. By the second year she knew the animals by disposition, if not always by name, could read the grass and the water the way you read a trail, and had opinions about which steers to cull and which to keep that I came to respect. She had a head for it. She had a head for most things, turned out. She also had dreams, not every night but enough. I learned early not to wake her too fast from them to let her come back on her own to have water ready. That was the only rule. She never asked me to fix the dreams, and I never tried because some things don't get fixed, they just get weathered, and she knew that better than I did. In the spring of 1875, we went to Las Vegas to buy cattle, and I bought a wedding ring from the jeweler on the main street, plain gold, nothing showy. And I gave it to her in the hotel room and said what I had to say, which was not long or elaborate because I am not a man of long words, just that she was the finest person I had known in my life, and I wanted her to stay. She put the ring on her right hand next to her mother's ring. She looked at them there together, the old plain band her mother had worn, and the new plain band from Las Vegas. And when she looked up her eyes were bright, not crying, just full, the way a creek goes full in the spring. You know you don't have to do this, she said. I'm staying either way. I know, I said. That's why I want to. She put the ring on her left hand then, where rings go. We were married at the church in Mora by a priest named Father Agustin, who was a spare, wiry man who said the words fast and meant them. And my neighbor Delmiro Archuleta and his wife Conception stood with us as witnesses. And afterward Conception cried in the way that Mexican women cry at weddings, which is to say without apology and thoroughly, and it was a good day, one of the best I can remember. There is one more thing I want to tell you. In the fall of 1875, about 6 months after the wedding, a man came to the ranch. He rode in on a good horse in the early afternoon when I was in the barn and Nora was on the ridge. She went up there most days, just for a while, to look out at the plains the way I'd told her about. I came out of the barn and recognized him before he was halfway across the yard. The man from the alley, the good coat, the black horse. I stood and waited. My hands were at my sides. He pulled up and looked at me. He looked different. The certainty had gone down in him somewhat, or maybe I was just seeing him clearer now that I wasn't reading him as trouble. He was just a man who had done a bad thing and knew it. "I'm not here for trouble," he said. "All right," I said. "I heard you'd settled here, heard you were married." "That's right." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the house, the corrals, the ridge above. "She's all right then," he said. "She is." He nodded, he turned his horse. I said, "What was it you needed?" He turned back, he looked at me for a moment and something passed across his face, not shame exactly, but the shadow of it, the shape it leaves when it's been and gone. "I don't know," he said, "just needed to see." He rode back the way he'd come. I stood in the yard and watched him go, and then I looked up at the ridge where Nora was a small, still figure against the enormous sky, the whole sweep of the eastern plains behind her, and the mountains behind me and the valley between. And the afternoon light was the kind that makes everything look like it has been here forever, old and true. She saw me looking up and raised a hand. I raised mine back. That is the whole of it, not a short story and not a simple one. The woman you choose is not a thing you rescue. If she's worth anything, she chooses herself first, and then she chooses you, and you'd better be worth the choosing. I don't know if I was. I know I tried to be. I know that every morning when I wake before dawn in that house in the Mora Valley, and the fire needs starting, and the cattle need checking, and the day needs doing, there is a woman asleep in that house who has looked at me, all of me, the plain and the flawed and the parts that don't hold up to hard examination, and decided to stay. That's worth more than anything I've ever bought or built or driven to market. Worth more than 300 head, worth more than the view from the ridge on a clear day, worth more than anything I know to put a price on. I know what I am. I'm a man who moves cattle and knows land and does what he thinks is right and doesn't always say the right thing. A plain man, ordinary, no particular shine to him. She thinks otherwise. I have decided, after 50 years of doing things my way, to believe her.